Good evening. I'm David Smith, and this is Week in Review. Tonight, we'll be discussing mobile death vans in the Netherlands, the beheading of women in Saudi Arabia for sorcery, and the end of the war in Iraq. We'd like to begin our broadcast this evening by acknowledging our co-host, Eric Hoffman in San Diego, and our audiovisual engineer and director, Daniel Moran, here in the studio in Fayetteville, Arkansas. I'd also like to remind everyone that we have a Twitter hashtag, WIRTV, if you'd like to tweet us, or if you'd like to send us an email during the broadcast or afterward, offering us questions, criticisms, comments. We'd appreciate it. That would be David, Daniel, or Eric at weekinreview.tv. So if you have any interest in communicating with us, we'd be happy to receive your comments and input. I'd like to begin with a few brief news items. The first is the mobile death vans in the Netherlands. Apparently, the practice of euthanasia, which is legal in the Netherlands, is not being enacted as fully as some people in the Netherlands believe. Apparently, last year, about 4,000 people were euthanized in the Netherlands, many, it turns out, without their consent, just on the decision of a doctor or a nurse. And they believe that they missed about 1,000 people that probably should have been euthanized. And they now have these mobile vans which will come to your home if you are ill or invalid and euthanize you in your home rather than you having to go to the hospital or to a doctor's office. This is an outrageous development given Holland's... talk about a house call. The experience that Holland endured during the Nazi occupation of their country in the Second World War, when the Nazis executed the infirm, the retarded, etc., as being unworthy of life, or simply because they were consuming the resources of the state. So we have a link to this article in our report today, and we encourage you to take a look at it. Secondly, we'd like to mention the beheading of a woman in Saudi Arabia for sorcery. She was executed this past week after having been found guilty of violating the law. She apparently had some bottles of some liquids and was found guilty of selling these apparently for about $400 a piece, and having been found guilty, was executed by beheading. I really don't understand why we have any diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia.
Maybe we should include on that gay rights thing that Hillary Clinton's pushing, maybe rights towards women and religious tolerance too.
Yes, that would be a
foreign aid off.
Yeah, we can cut some foreign aid off for this barbaric practice.
Yeah.
And if they don't end it, we'll just cut them off altogether. Because we do provide Saudi Arabia with $1 to $2 billion of aid every year, primarily in the form of military hardware.
Not to mention, technological assistance and stuff.
Thirdly, we would like to touch on the end of the war in Iraq, which the President declared today. As our troops begin to leave Iraq, many of them have gone across the border to Afghanistan, about 30,000 of them. Some have gone into Kuwait, others have gone down into Africa, and some few of them are coming back home to the United States. But the President, through Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta, who was present in Iraq today, declared the war to be officially over at a flag-lowering ceremony at which the American media was allowed to be present, but the Iraqi media was not allowed to be present. I'd also like to mention that we have some connections to some other stories that might be of interest that you can peruse at your convenience. Drones are being used in America to surveil and shadow American citizens, especially in North Dakota. Recently, there is a connection on the site to that story. There's also a connection to a video piece regarding our education as indoctrination rather than education. That's an interesting piece that you might want to take a look at as well. Also, there's a follow-up again on the moon of Europa, one of Jupiter's satellites. NASA says we could have a probe land on that moon by 2020. And that article is available for you to peruse as well. We have received a comment from a viewer, Catherine, and I'd like to read it to you. I have to agree with your hubs. This apparently was sent to Daniel's wife, Diana. Here mainly because everything else comes across as an hyper-aggressive opinion, where are more facts and intellectual discussion on causes, economic, physical, etc. Plus, given the culture and the statistical facts, the healthcare and education argument seems like a contrived belief in the westernization of these areas / cultures. Yes, it is present, but I do not believe to that extent. I believe, if anything, the lack of health care and education, along with the lack of basic women's rights, probably has a greater impact than the positive Western influence. Also, where is the documentation on marriages due to violence, poor diets, sexually transmitted disease, transient stress? Also, the point on the neglect on infrastructure was severely undermined by Colonel Sanders, aka David, and Eric. I feel that Daniel should have had the floor more, and given his previous statement, would have delved a little deeper into the social and political issues. All in all, it gets you thinking and places questions in minds, which is planting the seeds of change. Like for brief flash, or was that my YouTube being funny? I guess she had a technical glitch there. Gentlemen, responses?
Well, she can go to David Goldman's book, How Civilizations Die. He has the charts in there, and it's all noted.
Yeah. You should also go to the, refer to the Pew Research Forum, which provides much of this information. Also, she seems to indicate that we're mostly talking about the Middle East, which we're not. The predominant decline in the birth rate, although it is in Middle Eastern Islamic countries, is principally in countries in Western Europe and in the United States, which...
and Japan. Japan may cease to exist in a century or so.
Yeah, which occurs because of the influence of Western civilization on those who move from predominantly Islamic-dominated countries into those European and Western countries. So, but the documentation and information is at the Pew Research Forum, and also in the book How Civilizations Die by David Goldman. So we would refer Catherine to that. We thank her for her comments and observations.
And one mention, we do post a lot of these links on our site to the sources of our information.
Yes.
So anytime you have a question about something, one of our topics, all our topics are posted right on our site. Just go there, click on the link, it takes you directly to the location, to the source of our information. And then, of course, they reference their sources if appropriate.
So, well, shall we...
well,
I'm sorry?
Very good. We thank her for her comment, and comment again.
Yes.
Well, I would like to touch back on our predator drone issue. Here we are, and from what I've read of the article, we have police, that's local law enforcement, enlisting military-grade hardware to patrol our citizenry. I don't, even that sounds like a big conflict of interest. The police should not have military-grade hardware to, we didn't commission them to do that.
Well, the Pentagon holds an annual sale of used military hardware and makes it available to local law enforcement throughout the United States. There was the instance of, I forget which city it was in, but they were, the police decided to come out against some protesters at the Occupy protest encampment in their city, and an overly aggressive policeman actually drove out a tank that was stored by the police for riot, for use in the face of riots. So this type of military hardware is available to local law enforcement, and you can go online and look at any of that, that material.
Well, David, I think both you and I remember when we were kids that the LAPD had a sort of a tank battering ram they were using to break up drug dealing rock houses, safe houses.
Yes, they did. They finally were using it down in south central LA.
Right, but I seem to remember that whenever the Predator drones were introduced to the public, that there was a clear indication that they would not be used on U.S. soil.
Well, they're being used down in Florida, we know, and they're being used in North Dakota. It's odd that they're not being used on the southern border, where we have a flood of illegal immigrants coming across the border.
Right.
But they're being used against American cattle ranchers up in North Dakota. So there seems to be a disparity of if these drones are to be used, how they ought to be used.
Very cold, or yeah.
You know. And we have large amounts of drugs being brought across our border by Mexican trucks coming up from Mexico. These drones are not being used to curtail the drug traffic from Mexico into the United States. They're not being used, especially in Arizona, where we actually have federales and drug cartel members coming across our border and assaulting our border patrol. Why not?
So is this just an example of a overly funded police department that's just buying a toy? Because I would assume that they're underfunded. You know, nobody's sending money down to our law enforcement down on the border, so they don't have any extra money to go buy toys.
Well, I'm kind of suspicious why it was up in North Dakota. You know, North Dakota, Montana, South Dakota, Idaho are all areas where people who are survivalists or constitutionalists, etc., seem to congregate. It seems that the use of this type of equipment may be in a direct response to people who are in disagreement with what they perceive to be the socialist leanings of the current administration.
And this isn't going to do anything to discourage them from that.
No, that will only egg them on. You know, I think we have a picture of a drone, do we not, Daniel?
Yep.
So that, look up in your skies, and if you see one of these, let us know. You know, apparently they're going to be used more and more frequently in local law enforcement, which presents, again, the issue of the National Defense Authorization Act, which, by the way, was passed by both houses of Congress yesterday, December the 15th, which happens to be Bill of Rights Day. It was the date on which the Bill of Rights was actually ratified.
That can't be a coincidence.
No, that's not a coincidence.
I have a question for you on this. How do you think this is going to stand up in court?
Well, the problem is you have to have someone actually bring a case who has standing. And the courts, you know, it'll finally wind up in the Supreme Court eventually. It's obviously a violation of the 4th, 5th, 6th, 8th, and 10th Amendments to the Constitution. It violates our right to, you cannot, to quote Lindsey Graham, if you betray your country, you don't get a lawyer, which is nonsense because the Constitution provides exactly that. The government cannot decide, the executive branch or the Defense Department can't decide on its own that you are a traitor or a threat. You have to be indicted by a grand jury and tried before a jury of your peers. And the indictment must come on the testimony of 2 witnesses. It's all very clear in the Constitution about how
this is one of the things that bothered me about the Palawaki, you know, whatever you want to say, killing, assassination, is he wasn't even tried in absentia or anything.
Oh, and then his son, who, you know, was killed. Just on presidential order. So that's one of the reasons why the Obama administration, I believe, did not want the NDAA to pass. They've now reneged on that and said the president will sign it. But they didn't even want it passed because their position is that the executive has these rights by virtue of war powers. They don't want Congress getting involved in creating laws because all of a sudden it goes to the Supreme Court because there are constitutional issues. And this will simply not hold up in court because it violates the Constitution. in a number of amendments.
Yeah, but David, weren't you mentioning there was a politician out there that was trying to curtail the ability of the a branch of our government to prosecute this?
Oh yes, Newt Gingrich, one of the presidential candidates, made it clear that if he were elected, he would try to enact restraints on the courts because he believes that they're interfering with the congressional and presidential powers. So he sees the courts at war with the other two branches of the government, so of course he wants to curtail them, which of course would have to go to the court to be determined whether it was legal or not, and the court of course is not going to allow that. So this is just an attempt to get the more conservative element of the Republican Party to vote for him. He also signed the NOM, the National Organization for Marriage, their pledge to keep the Defense of Marriage Act. Mitt Romney has declined to sign that so far, but it's all politics. It's all trying.
It seems like throughout our lifetime, the power of the president has been growing and growing and growing.
Well, an interesting statement that President Obama made regarding the end of the war in Iraq was that unlike ancient empires, we don't do these things for land or for resources, but because they're right, referring to the invasion of a sovereign nation.
Ancient empires.
Yes, we're apparently an empire now. It's being acknowledged. We're not a republic. Yeah. We're an empire.
Well, he's not right anyway. Ancient empires went in to help out their buddies that were in trouble all the time.
Yes, so that's just fraudulent. But I thought it was interesting that it at least was being acknowledged that we're an empire.
Yeah.
We're no longer a republic, and we're now an empire. So we're going to project our sphere of influence by economic means, political means, diplomatic means, military means, whatever it takes. We're going to try and conquer the world and cause other nations to conform to our program, which is quite obvious from this whole issue of the State Department and Hillary Clinton making this statement that the United States will cut off aid to those countries that don't reform their laws and permit the legalization of homosexuality in their country, which of course Britain, Prime Minister Cameron joined that chorus as well, warning all the nations of the Commonwealth who do not remove the criminalization of homosexuality from their law codes, that their economic support from Britain will be cut off.
Well, anything that cuts off foreign aid, of course, I'm in favor of. But
yes,
like you were saying, maybe we could do it for women's violations of women's rights and religious tolerance too.
Yeah, this whole thing of the beheading of the woman in Saudi Arabia. I didn't hear any protest from the State Department about that.
From what I can see, we can cut off aid to just about every Muslim country in the world if we start doing this.
Which we ought to do. I just do not understand how we can have the Palestinian Authority granting any gay rights or religious tolerance. I know the punishment for homosexuality in the Gaza Strip is stoning.
Yeah.
There are no gay rights in Palestine or in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah.
I don't hear any protest over that. And we keep funneling money to them.
Yeah, are they going to cut off the money to them? Is Hillary Clinton's State Department going to cut off the money to the Palestinian Authority in the Gaza?
Well, we've cut off some for the UNESCO vote, which I guess the Palestinian flag was actually raised at UNESCO's headquarters this week, as they were acknowledged as a full member, which I don't understand. You can only be a member if you're a state. You know, the Palestine Liberation Organization is not a state. And yet it has ambassadors. And you can't have an ambassador unless you're a state. And yet they're trying to gain statehood. This totally illogical and absurd behavior makes no sense.
Maybe Al Qaeda can apply for statehood.
For statehood,
or
yeah.
government
Get an
exile
ambassador
or
going.
something.
You know, but you know,
They're-
I don't know.
They're really the caliph in exile or something. I don't know.
Well, it's odd. It's strange.
Well, the big problem I'm having, especially with the war on Iraq, or end thereof or something, is the fact that whenever we leave, we pull out, or as you mentioned earlier, we're not actually bringing our troops back to the U.S., we're withdrawing from Iraq, which is different than actually bringing them home. We're actually shipping them over to Kuwait or to basically to smaller countries next to it so we can still be close. But basically that's going to leave a big power vacuum in Iraq where Iran can then come in and make them a satellite state the way they've been wanting to for years. And I'm not talking about just a couple of years. You know, the Muslims have been in a war for 1,300 years. So this is an issue well beyond the even conception of the United States. Or the
That's
idea
true.
of it.
Yeah.
Well, I was listening to a few interviews with people who are living in Iraq, who are on the ground and who really know what's happening there. The nation of Iraq has essentially divided into two divisions. There are the Kurds in the north, who want to go join Kurdistan, form the Kurdish Union up there. They're not interested in being part of Iraq. They are because of an artificial state that was created by Britain and called Iraq. The majority of the religious Muslims in Iraq are Shia. And so, of course, they're going to be tied to Iran, which is actually running things over there. They have the influence, and they're actually running things. The Sunnis are about 7% of the population. They used to run things under Saddam Hussein by a military dictatorship. Well, there's no military dictatorship. They want their own portion of the country, but it would be a very small one. And they would have to have the protection of the United States. Because there's, as Daniel was pointing out, there's been this 1,300-year-long confrontation and conflict between the two divisions of Islam, the Sunni and the Shia.
Now, what's the major countries for each division? For each, you mentioned Iran was what kind?
Iran is the principal center of Shia
Of Shia.
Islam.
And there's a
And
majority.
Saudi Arabia is the principal center of Sunni Islam.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
pretty much Sunnis are everybody else.
You know.
okay, so
Sunnis
what's
are 90%, yeah. Didn't
Okay, so-
I may be wrong, but didn't the holiday about the murder of Hassan just happen like a few weeks ago?
Yeah, last week, I think. Sometime last week. And I'd remind everyone to show you how insane this confrontation is between them. They both believe, both branches of Islam, believe in the return of the Imam Mahdi, who is like their Messiah.
so it's like Jesus to Christians.
Yes.
Okay.
So now, according to the legend, he went down a well in a mosque in Karbala, Iraq. Now, the Sunnis believe it's one mosque, and the Shia believe it's another. And back in 2004, the Sunnis blew up the mosque. Over the well that the Shia believe houses the Imam Mahdi. And consequently, the Shia went and blew up the mosque of the Sunnis, where they believe the Imam Mahdi is hiding and is supposed to come out of. And it's necessary for the Imam Mahdi to return before the triumph or extension of worldwide Islam.
Okay.
But they're willing to destroy each other's holy site, and I guess kill the Imam Mahdi at the same time because he's in this well, because they don't want the other side to get him.
This is just nuts. The whole thing's nuts. But you mentioned the Kurds earlier, and the Kurds are one of the only groups in the Middle East whose population is increasing. So yeah, this is going to be a trouble for both Iran and Turkey when they get big enough.
Well, the Turks are they don't want the. There are going to be problems with Turkey and the Kurds in Iraq, because of course their population is growing, as Eric pointed out. They're needing more land, and the borders of Kurdistan are kind of small. Those people are going to need to expand. They're going to be moving into Turkish territory. And the Turks, of course, are not going to want to give up that land. And there's going to be a Turkish-Kurdish war that's going to break out there. It kind of flares, the confrontation flares up every now and again.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and there's plenty of Kurds in Iraq too. So yeah, I think you're going to be hearing, especially if the Palestinians have any success, you're going to be hearing the Kurds wanting their own nation real quick soon.
Which is one of the reasons why it's not for the sake of Israel that we're really opposed to the Palestinians getting a state, so-called Palestinians, the Arabs. They're getting a state. What we're opposed to is exactly that. If they get their state, we're going to have to give the Kurds a state. That's not going to be good.
State and so on and so on.
And there are all these puppet states and people that we've been manipulating and keeping at war with one another, allowing us to keep them from joining together. That's going to all be over because these people are going to have a justification for wanting their state, and they'll have a perfect example.
Yeah. Oh yeah, if the Palestinians get their state, it's the perfect example to the Kurds, the Basques, and whatever, the Tamils. You can think of 100 of these ethnic minorities that have been agitating for years for a state.
It'll probably cause the Afghans in Pakistan want a state of their own. They don't want to be part of Pakistan. They either want their own state or they want to go and be joined to Pakistan. So that the whole western side of Pakistan will disappear.
And the Sikhs in the Punjab have been talking about a state since the British were there.
Mm-hmm. And then, the Nepal will want, the division that India claims for itself will, of course, want to go join Nepal, and India doesn't want to give that up. So there are all kinds of problems that are going to surface.
Oh, yeah. Well, the French have seemed to give up on Quebec recently. That seems to have just died.
I wonder what the Quebecis are going to do.
Yeah,
they're not going to get their own country. So.
Yeah. Well, like I said, maybe the Chinese majority up in the Pacific Northwest will want their own state pretty soon. That could affect us.
Yes, that's true, because there's a very large increase in the Chinese population in British Columbia.
Yeah, all the way down into Seattle, Vancouver.
Yes.
Last time I was in San Francisco, I think the whole city's going to be Chinatown very soon.
Yeah. Well, there's that argument that the future demographers look at the future of the world and how it's going to divide up the northern California all the way up to through Washington will become part of the Pacific Rim nations. If the United States, for some reason, begins to divide up.
So if you give the Palestinians their state, yeah, the template's been set. You just agitate enough and get enough military hardware and cause enough trouble, and you get a state.
Well, that all is an interesting situation to keep an eye on, because now that our troops are withdrawing, and as Daniel pointed out, they're still close by to be sent right back in if our interests are threatened. We have there, I understand, the largest embassy in the world. Cost us $6 billion.
In Iraq?
In Iraq.
In Iraq, yeah.
There are 1,600 people to service the embassy, including some 5,000 troops, and I think it's 16,000 independent contractors that we're going to have to protect the embassy personnel and to ensure that the embassy is not attacked or endangered in any way.
In other words, it's also probably the world's biggest spy center, too.
Yes, yeah, the CIA of those, 1,600 people, I'm sure at least half are CIA.
Yeah, it didn't take $6 billion to put buildings up. There's probably all kinds of complicated spy hardware all through that thing.
So it's, but that's an interesting phenomenon in and of itself. We have our largest embassy and spy center right in the center of the Middle East. So.
Well, we're actually in a Cold War with Iran. I mean, no one wants to acknowledge it, but we are. They're already having exercises to close the Strait of Hormuz as we're speaking.
And do you know that? Yeah, you've all been following that, I'm sure. What that will do to the price of oil. If they do actually enact that, we'll go $50 jumps every day for about 4 or 5 days till it's up to $300 or $400 for each barrel of oil. You imagine what that will do to our economy.
Well, with Libya being down, they were only 2% of the world's oil, and Saudi is 25%. So.
Well, yeah, but that means other people are buying oil from who we buy oil from.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is the United States does not get its principal amount of oil from the Middle East. We get it from Canada. That's why there's this huge issue about the tar sands pipeline.
Yeah, the Keystone Pipeline.
That's why that's important. We need that oil. We get most of our oil from Canada. Most of the oil that we are extracting and protecting over in the Middle East goes to Britain.
Yeah.
Goes to Britain, or it's some of it is brought here, refined, and sent over to Japan. So.
Oh yeah. Well, what the Japanese do is we replace it with the Alaskan oil. They buy oil from the Saudis, but we take that oil and then replace it with Alaskan oil.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to send those tankers through the Suez.
Yeah. So we're. But that could create instantly a worldwide crisis. Because if that oil isn't flowing, Europe's in trouble. It doesn't get oil.
And the Chinese and the Russians are already trying to tie up the world's oil reserves.
Well, the Russians have sent a aircraft carrier battle group off the coast of Syria, as have we. The aircraft carrier George H.W. Bush and its carrier group are over there. I guess we're facing each other off in the Mediterranean.
And I believe you sent me a story on the first Chinese aircraft carrier, too.
Yes, we caught a spy, not a spy satellite, but Digital Global. One of their satellites actually caught an image of this Chinese aircraft carrier in deep water. They were testing it for seaworthiness. Apparently, according to the story, the aircraft carrier was a Russian one that was being built at the time that the Soviet Union collapsed. It then became the property of Ukraine, when all the Soviet satellites divided up and became the Commonwealth of Independent States, and it was sold to China, although it wasn't seaworthy at that point. It hadn't been finished enough. And the Chinese have been working on finishing it. They have no planes for it yet, but they apparently wanted to see if it was seaworthy, and we caught an image of it. It's up on the screen. And so that's kind of something to keep an eye on, because now the range of China's Navy could be extended considerably if it has aircraft battle groups that can move around.
Sounds like all the pieces are being set up for World War III, doesn't it?
Yeah, it looks like there's possibility, because now
we have Iran, a country who has a shrinking population that probably thinks it's their last chance.
Well, those are all interesting stories to keep an eye on, because with China's ability to now project military force around the world with a deep water navy, that changes the balance of power.
Yeah.
You know, and Russia and China are cooperating with each other. They have oil from Iran, and military hardware, etc. So it presents a not too pleasant scenario in the future. So,
yeah.
But,
oh yeah. Yeah. Like I said, we're already in a Cold War with Iran, and we're not in a war with China, but we're certainly in an arms build-up race with them.
Well, that's. I think we're far, as I said a couple of episodes ago. I think we're far ahead of them, and I think the materials we've been selling them and the technology, I think that's all been sabotaged in some way. A lot of it is probably not working very well for them.
Yeah.
But we pay off some of our supposed mounting debt with the sale of that technology, and.
Well, I'm working on some ideas about the quantization of thought, and I'll try and send you something within the next month or so, and we can discuss that at a later time.
Okay. Eric, you wanted to talk about a particular philosopher, Jean-Francois Revel, who was a prominent philosopher, member of the Académie Française. He died in 2006, having been born in 1924. One of the only, if not the only, significant French intellectuals to have a favorable opinion of the West, and particularly of the United States.
Yeah, I think he's been overlooked. We're used to well, like you said, he's like the only anti-Marxist French intellectual of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And I think he's been sorely overlooked in this country. He has some valuable insights on this utopian thinking and the threat of this, what I want to call communism or a new tribalism. And his last book just came out, Last Exit to Utopia, if anybody's interested. It just came out about a year ago. An excellent read. He's very easy to read, very clear.
His previous book was, Flight from Truth was one of his books in '92.
Without Marx and Jesus, How Democracies Perish. He's been quite prolific, yeah.
Yeah, I understand that was one of his significant works. Of
course, with our left-leaning universities here, he's never really gotten the due he should in this country.
He promoted the idea of liberal democracy as it was initially promoted in Europe. Liberty, democracy, and was very much opposed to the Marxist and Maoist philosophies that seemed to have dominated Europe, especially French thinkers in the 60s.
Yeah, he certainly deserves to be better known in this country. He's quite a cogent writer, quite intelligent, and I take seriously everything I've read by him. And like I said, he's a pro-American French intellectual. I mean, talk about a maverick. Talk about somebody that's swimming against the flood.
He had I had a quote from him that I wanted to read here, which was rather interesting. It was a quote that he issued after the September 11th attacks. And quote, obsessed by their hatred and floundering in illogicality, these dupes, referring to European socialists and communists, forget that the United States, acting on its own self-interest, is also acting in the interest of us Europeans and in the interest of many other countries which are threatened or have already been subverted and ruined by terrorism. I think he's one of the few voices, and he was making that statement in opposition to those who were claiming that the September 2001 attacks were a result of America's misguided foreign policy throughout the world.
Yeah. So yeah, he's somebody we can definitely recommend to our viewers. He's definitely thought-provoking, and yeah, I think he should have a greater readership in this country. We try and do that here. We try and bring books, authors we think would be interested to our viewers to their attention.
Okay, so we recommend his two of his books, Without Marx or Jesus, The New American Revolution Has Begun. The Flight from Truth, The Reign of Deceit in the Age of Information is another one of his books. And also his son, Matthew Ricard, was a microbiologist who converted to Tibetan Buddhism, and he and his father compiled a book together called The Monk and the Philosopher about Matthew's conversion to Tibetan Buddhism, which might be an interesting read for people who are looking for a Western perspective on Tibetan Buddhism by both a practitioner of the religion and a philosopher who was not a practitioner, but examined.
Well, that's another interesting thing about Ravel is he's one of the few modern writers that took spirituality seriously.
Okay, so we recommend those books to our readers. It'll help broaden your understanding of the European intellectual tradition and why they're so often at odds with us here in America. Well, anything else you gentlemen want to cover today?
Oh, I don't know. Did you watch any of the debate yesterday between the candidates?
I just saw that one clip of Newt Gingrich talking about the courts. I saw he had a confrontation with Michelle Bachmann.
Yeah.
A bit of a tete-a-tete between the two of them, which is...
Yeah, I just want to bring up one point is they talk about flip-flopping. Well, if you've had a long political career, not that I'm in favor of Romney, but I'm going to act as sort of a defender of him, but people do change their mind over the years. So it's really better to have somebody who has a flexible mind than somebody who's an inflexible ideologue.
Well, unfortunately, the Republican Party has been invaded by inflexible ideologues. You know,
Yeah.
It's their way or no way. As I pointed out, Newt Gingrich finally caved and signed the National Organization for Marriage pledge to defend DOMA and not to allow federal gay marriage legislation.
I don't think we really want our politicians signing all these pledges. I mean, I sort of want them to have some flexibility.
Well, it's the same thing as the never to raise taxes pledge, the Grover Norquist
the
pledge.
Grover
We got
Norquist
them.
pledge,
They won't raise taxes. They're bound by these moral codes of, this is attempting
But
to enforce the Christian religion on the entire nation.
Yeah, so I just want to add to everybody that this flip-flopper thing is not always a bad charge. You want somebody who can be convinced by evidence.
Well, it's a lot, we attack Obama for making certain promises and then not fulfilling them once he got into office. Well, guess what? The president gets a lot of information on the evening before he goes to take the oath of office that he had no access to before he became president. And the circumstances may be very different than he was aware of. Because all he has to go on are the opinions and ideas of his advisors until his political advisors, until he gets into office when he actually has the data and the facts.
Yeah, I just think this is a very dangerous position, that if we're going to criticize anybody who changes their positions, what's the point of trying to talk with anybody?
Well,
if you change your position, you're somehow wrong. You're somehow defective.
Well, the way I make my decision, the way I perform decision making is I make a decision based on the evidence that's presented in front of me at the time. I always reserve the right to change my mind when new evidence is presented.
Well, see, this is a very important issue in the issue of revisionism in history. People who want to revise history based on new information that contradicts or challenges the accepted position are always attacked and belittled, and all they want to do is present a fuller version of the information. Much of this information was sequestered and hidden under national security. That means, and now that we have the FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, much of this information is now available. And it does cause us to need to revise previously held opinions and ideas. But we seem to be terribly afraid of doing that.
Oh, yeah, and a lot of times I'll take abortion as an example, because I don't think most people who are pro-choice or there was just a big wave of, it was kind of cool to be pro-choice, but I think a lot of people, when actually confronted with the choice, thought about it seriously and did change their position.
Well, that's important. Also, the issue, let's use the issue, because it seems to be so important to the Republican candidates, same-sex marriage. The culture has changed. We do not have the Christian religion as the foundation of our culture any longer in this country. And therefore changes are going to come. And people are going to have differing opinions. The next generation is not going to adhere to the moral norms of the previous generation. And if we are absolutely unwilling to recognize the change, we're going to have a society that is in a cultural civil war with each other.
Yeah.
And that's what is happening.
Well,
and if we disparage anybody who changes an opinion, we're never going to reach an agreement.
Well, that's one of the great things and one of the bad things about the internet. It presents people with tons of new information that they did not have previously or didn't even have access to conveniently, with instantaneous opinions of millions of people across the world. New evidence means you change your opinion, which means a lot of people in the world are changing their opinion about a whole lot of things.
Well, I think a good point of what Daniel was just stating is Bradley Manning, the Army private who has been charged with releasing or was going to be charged. He was believed to have provided a videotape copy of a war crime in Iraq. Our troops firing upon a group of unarmed civilians, two of them reporters who were covering the issue of war crimes committed by American troops in Iraq. And that was released, and he was arrested, and he was taken before a military tribunal today for a Article 32 hearing, which is the military equivalent of a grand jury, to see if there's enough evidence to actually charge him with crime. But this terrible fear of the government that these documents released by Julian Assange, this evidence of war crimes committed by our troops in Iraq at times, we have to know the truth, and we have to be able to see it and to understand it, and then make up our minds about whether or not we're doing what's right. And the attempt to silence people, and there's also a bill that's going to go before the Congress to try to censor the internet, give Eric Holder, of all people, greater control over the internet. So that they can censor what the government doesn't think we ought to know.
Well, I think Eric Holder is definitely going to go down as the worst attorney general in living memory.
One congressman, I forget who it was, I saw it today, is going to offer a resolution of no confidence in Eric Holder, and if it's passed, they'll be able to begin proceedings to have him impeached and removed from office.
Now, what role does he
Yeah.
play?
He's the attorney general, who can't remember anything about Fast and Furious.
I know you and I were talking privately about the whole Supreme Court and everything in Kagan. We don't have time today, but we should probably take it up next time.
Now, there's a possibility, it's been found that Justice Kagan did actively participate in discussions about the health care, Obamacare, and she apparently lied to the Congress about it and said she did not. So we may have a possible resignation from the Supreme Court, or the first Supreme Court justice to be impeached, tried, and removed from office.
So wait a minute, what's the deal there? She did what?
She lied to the Congress and said she did not participate in any discussions while the Solicitor General regarding Obamacare. And of course now they have emails which indicate that yes, she did. She was very active.
Is that because they're all polled before they're allowed to take the case?
Well, they have to. She was directly asked about this by the committee. Did you have any input or participation in these discussions? She said no. Well, the emails indicate clearly that she did. She was very active in the discussion.
Of course, she was Solicitor General. How
yeah,
she be?
how could she not?
Unless they purposely walled her off because Obama knew he was going to nominate her as Supreme Court Justice. But at the time she was appointed, there wasn't any vacancies.
Yeah. So it was, and she actively participated in it. These emails are clear evidence of that. So it's just another evidence of our government collapsing and the court, of course, as Eric pointed out to me the other day, the only cachet they have is integrity. If the court if the justices are dishonest, it's all over.
Yes, we trust that they're going to make the right decision on the cases that they're presented.
And because they're the final arbiters of what the Constitution means.
Yeah, the only authority they have is their moral authority. If they lose that, then they're worthless.
And so we're having some serious problems with that. Well, we only have about 30 seconds left. Thank you, gentlemen. Interesting conversation. Next week will be our program before Christmas. So after we end here, we've got to decide what we're going to discuss.
I just have one more. I have one more announcement to make.
Okay.
I have a new entry on my blog about Wittgenstein. If anybody's interested, Process Idealism, blogspot.com.
I'd encourage people to look up Wittgenstein in Wikipedia. Interesting character. Interesting man.
Yeah.
his life is interesting. It's not only his philosophy, but his whole life is kind of interesting. So he was quite a character. So, and we'd like to remind you of Daniel's blog also. You can connect to both of those on our site. So please take the opportunity to view those blogs and also leave comments for Daniel and for Eric. Also, leave us comments, criticisms. Give us topics you'd like us to discuss or review or that you're interested in, and we'll be happy to talk about those. And give us news items. Please send us news items you'd like us to cover. We'd be happy to do that. Again, our Twitter is hashtag WIRTV. That's our Twitter hashtag. And our email address is David, Eric, or Daniel at weekinreview.tv. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope you'll join us next week. Have a good evening. I'm David Smith. This is Week in Review.
Tis the season
Authentic
to
U.S.
be
drone.
jolly.
U.S.
La, la,
leaving
la, la,
Iraq.
la, la, la.